Hello, this is Catherine from Accelerated Reader, reading books for you. Today, I will be reading Mark Vardy and the School of Ninjas by C.J.T. Wilkins. Before I begin reading, I would like to give a big thanks to the author for sending me this book to read on my channel. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book. Don't forget to like and subscribe. To Rod, my sensei, my inspiration, and the original Mark Vardy. To Grandmaster Brian Dosset, who launched a fleet of thousands. To the memory of Professor Bob Lawrence, who first showed me the magic of martial arts. To all the senseis who give so much to so many. Acknowledgements. The author would like to thank Rod Walton for sharing his imagination, his martial arts expertise, and decades of experience in the police force. Thank you also for the many conversations in which you helped me plan this book and your unfailing enthusiasm and belief in me. Thanks are also due to the friends and family of the author who so kindly read various drafts of this first Mark Vardy book, and gave so much encouragement and support. Thank you to Helen Knight, Norma Goder, David Bennett, Karen Toulon, Bernard Witcher, and Dawn Willock. Thanks also to Lauren Raybould for her editing services. A book like this, and those which will follow, could not have been written without so many generations of martial artists sharing and handing down their knowledge. I hope I have done them justice and will do so even more in the future. But I must at least acknowledge what they have given all of us. Finally, thank you to the New Forest, the scene of much of this book, and the place of daily inspiration to the author. Chapter 1. Mark? His mother called out of the kitchen door, out into the garden with amused resignation. Mark, have you got Jeff in your prison? I've got Mrs. Jones at the door, and it's time for his tea. I can't let him out yet, Mom, Mark replied. He's in for criminal damage. At 7 years old, Mark was quite convinced he was a police officer and considered it his duty to police the activities of the neighborhood children. Criminal damage can wait until tomorrow, Mark. Let him out, she said firmly. Well, I suppose I could let him out on bail, muttered Mark, as he reluctantly unlocked the garden shed. A scruffy boy emerged, blinking into the afternoon sun. Mark handed him a dog-eared envelope and held out a notepad and pen. Prisoner's property. Sign here. Jeff stuck the envelope under his arm and scribbled on the pad. See you tomorrow, said Jeff cheerfully. He ran up the garden and disappeared through the kitchen door. Mark! His mother's voice drifted out of the door again. Your dad will be down for dinner soon. He is working nights tonight. Now go and wash up for dinner. But I've got a lot of paperwork to do, Mom, said Mark. You can attend to that after dinner. Don't hold your dad up. Now go wash your hands, she replied. Can I go to work with you tonight, Dad? Asked Mark over dinner. He regularly requested this and was occasionally rewarded with a trip to the police station. No, son, I need you to stay home and look after your mom. There was a note of tension in his dad's voice. Can we visit the station later? Begged Mark. Not tonight. I won't be there, he said. Where will you be, Dad? Mark was intrigued. I've got to deal with some very bad people tonight, son, he replied. You are very brave, Dad, pronounced Mark. Is bravery the most important thing to be a good policeman? His dad thought for a moment and then said very slowly and thoughtfully, Mark, it takes many qualities to be a good policeman, and bravery is just one of them. The most important quality is integrity. You must also have compassion, empathy, self-discipline, a desire to preserve life, protect the vulnerable, and a sense of humor. What are compassion and empathy, Dad? Asked Mark. It means you have to care about people, son, he replied with a gentle smile. I must be off, said Mark's dad, rising from the table. He kissed his wife and held her just a little longer than usual, reluctant to let her go. Then he crouched, hugged Mark, and placed his police helmet on Mark's head for a moment. You are in charge of security, he said to him with a smile, then took his helmet back and placed it on his own head. He stood at the long mirror in the hallway a moment, checking his uniform. Beside him, Mark straightened his own costume police uniform. His dad gave Mark's hair an affectionate ruffle before smoothing it and saying, I think we are both fit to report for duty. With that, he opened the front door and went out to work. Mark was woken by the sound of a knock at the front door. His mum passed his bedroom door on her way to go down and answer the door. Stay in bed, Mark, she said, trying to get him to go back to sleep, but Mark detected a frightened note in her voice. By the time she had reached the front door, Mark was sat in his dressing gown at the top of the stairs. He could see blue flashing lights through the window above the door. Mark's mother opened the door. Two senior police officers in smart uniform with a lot of silver braid were standing there. May we come in, Mrs. Vardy? One of them asked. She opened the door to let them, her heart pounding and her face contorted with apprehension. She already knew why they were here and knew what would happen next, although she desperately wished she was wrong in her fears. They took their hats off and came in. She showed them to the living room and closed the door behind them, leaving Mark alone. A familiar face appeared in the open front doorway. It was Mark's father's best friend and colleague, Sergeant Yield. He gave him a look that said 1,000 things, yet nothing at the same time, before disappearing into the front room after his mother and the top brass. Sergeant Yield emerged a few minutes later and made his way up the stairs to Mark. He sat on the top of the stairs with him. What's happening? Why is the commissioner here? Asked Mark. I spoke to your father earlier, Mark, said the sergeant. He told me he had left you in charge of security and looking after your mother. Yes, Sergeant. Well, something terrible has happened. And you are going to have to be very brave and strong, dear boy. Do you think you can do that? Mark blinked back tears, knowing what he would say next. I'll try. Days passed by in a blur. Mark's mother was constantly crying. A procession of friends visited and drank tea with her in the little kitchen. No one talked to Mark about what happened. He felt helpless. He couldn't console his mom, and he was also unwilling to face his own feelings. He remembered his father's words. You are in charge of security. Mark decided that the best thing to do would be to open his police station in the garden again. He made a series of minor arrests, and the neighborhood children were locked in a shed for suitable periods of time. Each evening, a different neighboring mother knocked at the door to bail their children out for tea time. Each morning, Mark went to the real police station and made his report to Sergeant Yield. "Officer Vardy, come to deliver my crime report for yesterday," Mark announced. "I arrested Jeff Jones again for cycling without any lights on a pavement. I arrested Peter Dixon for scrumping apples in Farmer Giles' orchard. I arrested Lily Wilson for fighting with Zeb Wilson and causing a breach of the peace. They all served time in my jail and were released on bail." "3 arrests in one day, dear boy," said Sergeant Yield. "I wish all my officers could match your arrest rate. You are a chip off the old block. Your father would be proud of you. How's your mother doing?" "She is still crying all the time, Sergeant. We have to go up to London tomorrow to receive Dad's award." "I know. Well, pass on my regards to her and tell her I will see her tomorrow for your dad's presentation." The next day, Mark and his mother were up early and on the train platform to catch the train to London. Waiting for them there was Sergeant Yield. He greeted Mark's mother with a hug, received a salute from Mark, and they all got on the train together. Mark had never gone further than the next stop on the train before, so he watched avidly out the window as the train made its way into the capital. As the factories, housing blocks, and various buildings flitted past, Mark wondered who lived and worked in all these places. When they got to London, they took an underground train to the Embankment. This was very exciting. Mark was amazed at the really tall flights of stairs and escalators that took them deep underground to the maze of tunnels and platforms below. He found it a little scary to think that the train was taking them underneath the big city of London. He was particularly concerned at the idea of a train going under the river. He wondered aloud whether the river ever leaked into the tunnels. Sergeant Yield assured him it was quite safe. When they emerged from the underground, up yet more escalators and stairs, he was excited to see lots of famous buildings and landmarks. To his right was Big Ben, Parliament, Westminster Abbey, and Westminster Bridge. They turned left onto the Embankment and walked alongside the River Thames. He could see a large domed building on the other side of the Thames. "What's that?" asked Mark. Sergeant Yield replied, "That's St. Paul's Cathedral. It looks beautiful when it is all lit up at night. You should see it." Mark hoped he would one day, perhaps, when he was all grown up and a police officer in London. They walked a little further and then sat down on a bench to eat sandwiches. The river in front of them and the Scotland Yard building behind. After polishing off a sandwich, Mark hopped up, wanting to look at the Scotland Yard building. This was the center of all his dreams and ambitions. This is where police officers came from. He had seen the building in police dramas on the television. It was like a character in its own right. This was where his father was to be honored. He looked up at the imposing building. A figure stood at a window on the second floor. Mark couldn't make out any more than an outline, but he wondered who it was and whether they were a very important police officer. He wondered whether he would stand at that window one day. The presentation passed like a surreal dream. The police commissioner who had come to the house that terrible night made a fine speech about Mark's father and presented his mother with the Police Gallantry Medal that had been awarded to his father posthumously. On the way home, Mark sat staring at his father's medal in its velvet-lined box. Very little was said. Everyone was deep in thought. Mark's mother's eyes were shining with both pride and grief. She looked at Mark, thinking for a moment about what the future may hold for him. She wished she could keep him home and safe forever, but knew that was not possible. He had his own adventures to live. 5 years later, there was an almighty crash as 12-year-old Mark shoved his prisoner through the swing doors of the police station. Holding him with one arm behind his back and another to his neck, he marched him up to the front desk. Sergeant Yield raised an eyebrow. "Yes, Mark? What do we have here, dear boy?" Sergeant Yield had the well-spoken voice and expressions of an old soldier. Mark enthusiastically nodded to one of the wanted posters on the wall. "I got him, Sergeant. He's wanted on suspicion of burglary." His prisoner, a spotty youth of around 14, did indeed match the poster. Sergeant Yield didn't know whether to be pleased that they had their suspect or alarmed that Mark was now taking on more serious cases. "Thank you, Mark. We will take it from here," he said. Mark reluctantly handed his prisoner over to a custody officer. "Can I take him down to the cells?" he asked hopefully. "No, lad. Run along now," was the disappointing reply. As Mark left the police station and trotted off down the road home, Sergeant Yield picked up the phone and dialed a number. "Yield here. It is time." A few days later, when Mark sat down to breakfast with his mom, there was a flutter from the letter box. Mrs. Vardy rose from the table and fetched the mail. She returned holding an unusual envelope. It was made of thick white paper and edged in silver. The address on the front had been written with an elegant fountain pen hand in dark green ink. It was addressed to Master Mark Vardy. His mother handed it to him with interest. Mark was excited. No one wrote to him. Not like this. He had never received such a special-looking letter before. He opened it extremely carefully, keen not to damage the envelope. He pulled out the letter inside. Again, it was on expensive-looking, thick, white paper, edged with silver and written in cursive dark green ink. He read the letter carefully, looked confused, tried again, and then handed it to his mother. "I don't understand," he said. Mrs. Vardy took the letter and read it out. "Dear Mark, congratulations! You have been awarded a place on the summer selection course for the Academy. Please find enclosed details." She looked at him. "Well, it seems pretty clear to me, dear," she said. "You are being invited to their selection course." "But I didn't apply," said Mark. "What is the Academy?" Mark's mother smiled. "It is the college that your father studied at before he joined the police force. It is a very special place, and only very lucky young people are invited to study there. It's not a place anyone can apply to join. Instead, they are scouted by alumni from the college. Someone must have spotted you and recommended you." "Who could that have been?" pondered Mark. "I doubt you would have to look much further than Sergeant Yield," his mom said with a smile. "That would mean—" Sergeant Yield went "There too!" exclaimed Mark. "How else do you think he became your father's best friend?" asked Mrs. Vardy. "What do they teach there?" said Mark. "I want to be a police officer." "The academy trains young people to have extraordinary skills. Some become police officers, some become soldiers, some follow other paths. But if you want to become a police officer, this school will make you a very special, elite kind of police officer. That's what your father was." "Then I shall go," Mark decided. "I will go and pack." "Well, you aren't due there until next week," his mom laughed. "A warrior is always prepared," said Mark with a grin and rushed upstairs. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned for Chapter 2. Don't forget to like and subscribe. In the description below, I've included links where you may find and purchase this book.